Hi, Wim.
Hey, Liam. Hi.
Bernard. Yeah.
Yeah. 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock your time is the meeting, is the nephew time. Meeting
Yeah,
time.
5 p.m. is my time for
Nephew.
the start of the day. Getting into a rhythm on it now.
One moment. I'm going to log in back 1 moment. I'll be right back.
I guess it's 6 p.m. for you, Bernard, yeah?
Yes, that's true.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So it looks like Sana won't be able to join. She has a conflict. So let's give it a minute, maybe. All right, should we get started? Okay, let's jump right in. So a couple logistical things. Any feedback from I see Bala, I see Vim, and a few others. I know SIG1 did define the R2 deliverables there in the other document I linked here. There has been a fair bit of discussions between SIG1 and some of the SIG2 members here. I know last time Vim, Bala, and team had presented in terms of who are the key owners for each of the areas. They are all documented in here somewhere. So given everything, any other, I know we'll need to keep refining and updating the CUJs, but please help us understand if there's anything else that you immediately need in terms of better structure of the CUJs or the scope of work or deliverables and so forth.
It's with me. Yeah, we started to scope things out, right? So the problem is that for item 1, I mean, I have a presentation on it today, right? If we have time. I think I think John, I saw you also joining. I have the feeling that the run side is the most mature at this stage, and then there are some tech debt items. And then we are working on the POC. So, if you ask me, the most mature at this stage is the run side, and I think Sagar is doing an awesome job, because he is also incorporating the ability to not have to be able to configure all the different parameters in a vendor agnostic way. So yeah, and then I think John has been working on some technical debt, but yeah. So I think at this stage, more detail, I think from my perspective, is not necessarily required. Although I think for item number 1, the infra part, right? There it will have to be a collaboration between SIG1 and SIG2 in my view. And I have the feeling, my perspective is that, I don't know, I mean, that's my personal view, that I think it would be good if we can lay down the building blocks and maybe do some small prototyping on it. But having a full deliverable in R2 seems to be very far-fetched. From what I can see. But okay, yeah, I mean, that's my 2 cents. But I have the feeling that in terms of detail right now, I think John or other people, I think we are starting to figure it out somehow.
I agree. I don't know that we need additional detail. I think given the short time frame of R2, there's very limited things we're going to be able to actually achieve. And so we're going to, a lot of those things are going to fall into R3, but what we will achieve in R2 is some, like Wim said, some technical debt, probably this RAN side, which is pretty cool. And using multiple functions, vendors, and so we'll get pieces of it, but like I don't know that we need additional details from SIG1, right? I think there's plenty of work right now, and we will refine it and we'll iterate, but I don't think we need specific additional details right now. Kaushik?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Maybe I had this idea that I'd also talked with Sana a few days ago, which is in the block diagram that we had shown in terms of how does Nefio fit into the larger telco landscape. There was one in the other document. Let me share this slide or this doc where we had shown Nefio, but there is SO, SMO potentially. There may be OSS, BSS layers on top. So when one way that I was thinking it might help SIG2 in terms of conceiving the intent. So one of the things for every CUJ, you need to understand what is the intent that is being supplied to this Nefio layer. And if it's going to benefit, we can also define the top level intent. So right from, let's say, SO, what is the intent, and then what flows down to the domain orchestrator, which is Nefio. I think just maybe visually depicting that from SIG1 might help SIG2 and 3 understand, like, hey, what's the overall user journey for the customer persona that starts maybe from SOSMO, and then how does it percolate down to the Nefio layer, and what is the intent that is being passed down to Nefio by the top layer. If you think that level of detailing would help, it's not necessarily about R2, like I said, but it might help you conceive in terms of what are the higher layer, trying to solve, and then how does it, trickle down to the Nefio layer, right? I think that visualization for every CUJ might be useful.
I think that's useful. I think that what I would also want to see in that process, right? So there's the person at the very high level, and they're looking at like, I want this service running, and it percolates down, like you said. And as it percolates down, there's input. So like, there's an infrastructure team that's going to say, here's the infrastructure we own and can support, and here's the configurations that we can support. And our idea with Nefio is that infrastructure team can sort of independently provide a palette of brushes or of paints that that the orchestration can use to satisfy the upper layer intent. So I'd like to understand, at least I know it's going to vary from telco to telco, really, but I would like to have some understanding of what teams are involved in that process. So there's like a network planning team, there's some sort of infrastructure team, there's some sort of network function team that validates specific vendors' network functions on specific hardware. There's like, I imagine there's like a number of teams that sort of are involved in creating those Lego bricks that we're going to assemble. And so having an understanding of that, at least sort of a canonical use case or structure, I think would also be really helpful. So like the stuff Wim's talking about, like the infra, a big part of what we're trying to figure out is how does the network function? So at the higher level, you've got the service that's going to require certain network functions. Those network functions are going to have certain requirements of the infrastructure. And so that's a boundary we're working on right now. So trying to understand better who's involved in those sort of decisions would be useful, I think.
Yeah, but John, that is not necessarily the higher levels. That is even within our domains that we are that we are operating. So, yeah, I think also this picture we probably have to discuss a little bit, right? First to see, we have to first discuss this picture before, because I don't think we have a full alignment yet on it. I think
if it helps, we can define where does the journey start from the upper layers, from a user personas, intents that are being passed down to the domain layer, right? And in certain cases, maybe these personas might directly interact with Nefio, right? Potentially, right? So all of those details, I think I will try to maybe in the same R2 planning document, I'll try to draw somewhat of a visual picture for every CUJ that we have for, let's say, R2 scope, and we can take it from there. But that's something that I feel will be important. It's less so about R2, but it'll help the community understand how to really structure the design forward. But other than that, it's good. Please keep us in the loop, SIG1 team, if you need any inputs in terms of proceeding with implementation. That's for John, Wim, and others.
Okay.
The second item was on the service assurance. Subhash, I don't know if Subhash is here or not.
Robbie has a hand up though first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So yeah, probably I missed the discussion when this picture was presented. So I understand the SMO piece because I participated in ORAN, the O1 O2 interface with O2. I mean, you have the O2 IMS, DMS. I mean, for similar kind of use cases for cluster provisioning, software management, and all that, and network function deployment. The other one on the NFO piece. For me, the way I was kind of having some kind of a picture in mind is you have a service orchestrator, and then you have kind of specialized kind of orchestrations like SMO, and then for the transport and the core coming in, and then the Nefio kind of sitting kind of below that. So I was just trying to understand this picture. I mean, what does this mean saying that from a NFVO, because that somehow is service agnostic, but SMO is service aware because it's dealing with specific vRAN kind of deployments. What does that mean exactly to have a SOL API and an O1 O2 parallel kind of interfacing with Nefio?
I think that's why, Ravi, why I said we have to probably discuss this picture.
Yeah.
First.
Oh, I thought this was discussed. I wasn't there when it was.
Okay. No.
So maybe I don't think.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think this was more like this has not been discussed to the point that Wim is making. This was more of a placeholder layering architecture that I think Sana or someone, I forget who put it. But then the next step is for this to be somewhat shared with the community in an editable mode that I know, Tal, you are trying to put this in a Google Doc or something. This really needs to be, this needs to be discussed, right? I'm not in line with this architecture, not the same questions that you have, Bala, but there are other questions that I have, right? So for now, ignore this picture. My meta point was Nefio is part of the orchestration subsystem. So it might help to paint the overall user journey and then see how Nefio fits in to solve that for that CUJ. That was a meta point, but this picture needs a lot of pre-work and thorough discussion.
Yeah, maybe I think what is important also to outline if we want to define a journey with, let's say, in a brownfield condition or not, because I think it will be a little bit different if we are in a greenfield solution using Nephew as much as possible, or if we are using, let's say, existing component like existing SO and so on. I think it's also, maybe for me, it will be a little bit different, the way all the intent will be defined at the top level, on reuse at the bottom layer and so on. So I think we need to be careful about that also, because when I see the picture, to be honest, I'm a bit afraid, because we have all these layers. When we want to implement that in real network, it can be very complex. So we have also to be careful about that. Maybe to explain where Nephew can fit in, let's say, in existing with existing deployment, and how can Nephew in the target can be used in a broader sense. So that's maybe something we need also to have in mind, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Eric.
Yeah.
So I'll come back to this document again. So back to I don't know if Subhash or anyone from Samsung is here, but then, or maybe anyone else who helped author the service assurance document. We had a very short time last meeting where it was somewhat rushed. Was there anything else that we needed to follow through? There were a couple points that I remember Sana and myself had made in terms of understanding, in terms of what is it that the Nephew domain layer is helping in terms of matrix and capabilities to help solve for the overall service assurance use case. So I don't know if Subhash or anyone else who helped author this document wants to talk through this any further. I did not see any comments on the document, if I'm not wrong.
So I was supporting sort of editing this document, but I believe we've got two different angles of how we were approaching the content here. So there's one angle related to how can we sort of make use of the Nephew capabilities, the Nephew processes, to generate information which could be used for service assurance. And there's the other angle, more from a, let's say, tooling perspective, to explain that sort of in order to support closed loop automation, there might be the need for sort of coming up with mechanisms which would allow to sort of, for instance, inject policies into this Nephew process, possibly sort of trigger certain actions, etc. And my approach was simply to start from a user perspective and explain in which levels of maturity we could enhance the currently existing Nephew procedures to more and more facilitate all those service assurance related activities. And I would leave it to Subhash regarding how this could potentially be addressed.
Okay. I don't know, Bernard, if you wanted to talk through it, or would you?
I would leave it to I would have rather have Subhash present it and then chime in.
Okay. So given Subhash, I don't see him on the call. I'll follow up offline with him. What would be great if everyone can add their comments on the document. The doc link is in here. Please take a look and please add your questions. I'll try to work with Subhash offline to follow up in the next meeting.
Yeah. Maybe quick, Kaushik. I had the feeling in this mode is that we are building a service assurance next to Nephew. I have the feeling we should enhance Nephew to provide assurance from what it's doing, and that by itself is a closed loop system. So in other words, it will. So for example, at the moment we haven't done a lot in this space, but we are, for example, discussing, like, say, observability, right, as a key component within Nephew. It's not an R2 deliverable, so there is some people discussing it. So once you have those type of capabilities, you have the baseline to do many things. And for me, I prefer that we make it an integral part of what Nephew is doing, and that the system is able to not only look at configuration, but also at let's say state and metric and whatever else is needed. And based on that, creates additional actions and closed loop as such. So, which would be for me the way forward, rather than building a completely separate system at the back.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, go ahead, Tal.
Yeah, Wim, I agree with what you're saying. I think that's exactly what we're proposing. The idea being that if we have a service assurance use case, we will be able to build the primitives, including the status updates, to do that. It's the SA use case I treat more as an example for motivating us to do that thing, right? Because we want to be use case oriented and not just create building blocks where we don't know what they're used for. So we would actually have a use case here to follow and test against and validate, but we should be doing exactly what you're saying, right? Building the building blocks in Nefio to enable SA use cases. And also, there's no one service assurance use case, right? It's a family of use cases that we'd want to support.
But one of the things in the picture that was presented last time was like it sits next to what we were doing, and I have the feeling, yeah, that's where my comment is coming from.
Subhash wrote that document, although we didn't work on it together. I think the point was just to explain what service assurance is, generally speaking, so we get everybody on board. It wasn't supposed to be a blueprint for something that Nefio should follow that, right? The implementation of Nefio would be whatever we decide, right? But that's kind of how SA works, I guess, conceptually. I think that was the point.
Yeah, I'm with Tal also on this one. I just said one thing, which is when we say service assurance, my terminology is service belongs to the upper layer today, right? Unless today Nephew is not looking to get into SMO, SO. So with that kind of a SOAP, it is a higher layer is how I'm looking at it. Yes, Nephew needs to support primitives for whatever capabilities it supports, right? So intent reconciliation, status updates, like those closed loops at that layer make sense. But then if you're talking about service, which is a higher level construct, then service assurance also would be, that should be external to Nefio using the capabilities of Nefio. That's the way I look at it.
Maybe I got this wrong, but service here is not the same network service word used in the Etsy model. I think we're talking about service in terms of providing service to users. I think that's what's meant in the word service assurance. So it's actually a very low level concept.
I see. Let's maybe document the terminology, because the term service can mean many things, right? So
yeah, the other point is actually in that diagram where you had the Owen kind of interface in terminating on Nephew. Owen is everything related to vRAN service aware, like day zero configuration along with telemetry that feeds into the RIC and non-real-time RIC and so on, right? For AIML training and all that. So, I mean, so you need to still kind of show that boundary, whether how much responsibility does Nephew take in actually relaying those metrics back into the SMO. So otherwise, saying O1 there is certain requirements you're consuming from an O1 perspective, that needs to be clarified.
okay, so any other inputs or thoughts on the service assurance doc?
Other than that, the document needs a lot of rework or updates, I think, but we'll comment on it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, please keep updating, adding your comments rather, and then we should follow offline. By the way, in any of the working groups, are we following up on some of these specific topics? That was actually one of the logistics things that I wanted to bring up, which is we had defined 4 working groups. There were leads defined for each of the working groups in the table that we had put together. And the request to all of the for the leads on each of the working groups was to self-organize and schedule and conduct. I know some of the working groups have been meeting. I see updates on the Slack channels. I would really encourage everyone, now that we have somewhat done some of the R2 planning, and now we are starting to really plan for more forward-looking roadmap. It will be useful and encouraging if other working group, the leads, can self-organize and follow through. If you need any help and support from Sana or myself for organizing the sessions, please let us know. But my request is, please, start meeting and start discussing and following up on the key topics.
I mean, so we've been hijacking the WG4, the workgroup 4 meeting for SDK discussions and status updates. So that one we've been using that meeting for this purpose.
Okay. Maybe if I didn't explicitly add it, but one rigor we should have is we should circle around for all the working groups and give a status update. I don't know, maybe let's start with working group 1. I haven't seen any meetings that have happened in the last week, so I assume no updates. But in case people in a smaller forum met and discussed anything around the architecture, please provide your updates. Otherwise, let's keep moving around to working group 2.
By the way, I'm trying to find a list of all the working groups and the people responsible. I can't find it in the agenda, but is it somewhere?
It is, I think, linked off of the Slack channel. It is in the other document, which is linked off the agenda. But one sec, let me.
Is it the R2 planning document, maybe?
No, it's not in that. It was in, there were there were multiple agenda documents. So in here, in between, we had this document, other document. And in this document, we had this table. Can you folks see it?
Yeah, I'll pin this document to the Slack channel so people can find it easier. Okay. Agenda
Okay.
planning.
I think it is already pinned.
I mean, one thing you can do.
Oh, you're right. It's just called working groups. You're right.
For SIG automation, I created a README in the governance repo. That, I mean, now it's from R1. It's from our subgroups we had there. So probably we're not really following the subgroups anymore. But you could do that too, as a sort of canonical place rather than a doc somewhere. It's harder to discover.
I see. Can you point me to that, John?
Yeah. 1 second. In the chat.
Okay, so let's keep moving. Working group 2. By the way, the set of leads also might have changed. I know some of you also have been helping out on ORAN. So please contribute your name if you would like to lead any of these working groups. But has there been any updates to share here for working group 2 that was more ORAN focused?
Sagar has his hands raised. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Sagar.
Yeah, hi Kaushik. I added for the blueprint when you were talking about the architecture. So in the epic, which Bala created, I added there the image, which I think I'm not pretty sure if I discussed in this SIG or I discussed this once in SIG automation. So the image is there, and I'll ask people to have a look at that blueprint, and if they have any comment, if they would like to make any comments, it'll be nice to discuss there. And I rechanged the name of the cloud, central cloud or edge cloud, based on an ORAN document, OCloud document, which I've seen. It'd be nice to get some more feedback. And I'm also making a network diagram like the one Eric made for R1. So I'll keep on updating everything on that particular epic. That's it.
Sagar, I was just,
thank you.
You mentioned, sorry, just one follow-up question. You said there's a, I just see some links and some skeletal kind of write-up? Is there more detailed things? And I'm aware of this document, yeah, the CAD document. I can always help you with that. But what do you want feedback on?
Like the diagram, if everybody's fine with the terminology which I have used. So I think I'll just write a little bit more in that epic in terms of feedback,
Okay, yeah.
which I would like to have. It's more like the terminology I have used, is everybody fine with it, or they would like to align it a little bit more in terms of ORAN? If somebody has something to say about this blueprint per se, so anything like that, or if somebody has any question, let's see.
No, I see basically the details are missing. So probably that's what is probably you'll follow up with, right? Okay.
I pasted the epic in the chat. So Sagar, looks like probably John, I think we may need to add Sagar's GitHub account to our arc. Probably I'll work with John on that, then I can assign it to you, Sagar. But yeah, yes, this is the link for the epic that Sagar is talking about.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Okay. Any other updates on ORAN? I didn't see anything on the Slack channel. Cool. Working group 3, I don't think we have been meeting except for the R2 planning. I will work with Sanar to help organize the more forward looking, but then realistically, I think it's working group 1 and 2 and 4 that will need to start doing the work before working group 3 can really crystallize that and figure out how to milestone it. So we'll depend a fair bit on the other working groups. And then lastly, working group 4. I don't know if
yeah. So
Stephen, you had mentioned you had been hijacking it, right?
Yeah, we hijacked the meetings. The SDK team basically just hijacked that meeting because the Helm support, I think the community, at least for the folks who show up on the WG, the work group 4 meetings, agreed that we'll put Fiacra and other people's efforts for Helm support onto the SDK effort. So we've been having updates and we have this stock for the contributors list and set of tasks for SDK. So let me link it. Other than that, it's been the work group 4, as far as I know, has been a lot about Helm support. So now that we kind of stabilize it into the SDK effort, it hopefully be a it's more concrete now, hopefully.
Yeah, I think on Helm and SDK is progressing quite well. I think UI, I don't think there's really discussion upon. Tosca, I don't know. The Helm and the SDK, I think, have been they are progressing well, but they are more going towards, let's say, SIG2 type of discussions at the moment, Kaushik.
Right, and I've been following
it's a mix.
the Slack.
It's a mix. The mix between SIG1 and SIG2, more or less. More SIG2 these days, I think.
Yeah, POC development is pretty much on that route already.
I see. Yeah, I've been following the Slack channels. I haven't seen much on the SDK discussion channel. Is there anything that you would like to bring up here in terms of that body of work, or is it more to be purely followed in SIG2?
We have been giving updates on SIG2, about 2 minutes every week. And then also the agreement, I guess, with some of the community members, we run sprints. With the first one, it's going to be a whole month. So by the end of September, we'll converge on some POCs and updates, and then want to demo that to, well, mostly the user, our user community is actually the network function vendors, to make sure that the use of it and what it supports actually fits their needs. So we're moving toward that direction at this point. More of a semi-execution mode.
I see. And then for this working group, it will be useful. I know, Tal, you have been talking about Tosca in the past. There have been talks about NSD. Like, I think those are also, I know we are all busy, but those are also areas that we should start to explore. So maybe Tal, if you could help take the lead, let us know how rest of the community can help out.
Yeah, I have a POC and presentations that I will eventually show. Here's the issue, right? We're casting an extremely wide net here. I mean, even each of these 4 work groups has, well, some may be more than others, but there's a lot to do. There's a lot of energy right now on Helm and the operator SDK, and I don't want to derail that right now because the RT release is very close. But as soon as there's any interest at all in the Tosca side of things, I have a lot of things to show. There's just so much time as in the week, and so many meetings already. As Stephen pointed out, for efficiency, we kind of hijacked Workgroup 4 to talk about Operator SDK right now. That's where most of the energy is. But I'll put it this way: I'm kind of waiting for the topology controller to mature a little bit, because that's where I would like to show the showcase a Tosca approach to doing that. So yeah, I'm waiting in the shadows like a tiger, and I will pounce.
And that's also mine. So this is part of my technical debt. It hopefully would be. I'll repost the PL sometimes this week or next week.
Okay, perfect. I know I perfectly understood, Tal. Let's stay focused. What I meant was, if you have made progress, please do share it, but understandable if you haven't had the cycles.
Yeah,
Okay,
I can say that I do have progress, and I have my choice has been to focus on the higher level, so NSD level rather than NFD level. So that's why topology controller is the focus. And the idea is to show how Tosca types can be directly translated into Nephio KRM using a pretty simple heuristic. So yeah, so you can basically take a Tosca CSAR with a complete topology, everything that we do, and deploy it immediately without having to know anything about Kubernetes. I'll be able to show that in the future as soon as it becomes relevant.
Perfect. Thank you, Tal. Okay, so I think we have gone around for the working group updates. We have about 20 minutes or so. I know Bernard and Tal, you had added this also in the last meeting, if I'm not wrong. Was there more? Did you have anything more specific to share here beyond the documented proposal?
Sure. I guess I hope it's clear what we're proposing here, but Bernard and I have been talking about this, that our models and how we manage models, by which we usually mean CRDs, even though technically I want to emphasize that many of our resources are not CRDs. Even though they're custom types, they are not ever registered as CRDs in our current technology. Point being, they've been created somewhat in an ad hoc manner between SIG 1 and SIG 2. Mostly SIG 2 has actually been leading it, coming from implementations, right? So a lot of the meetings about different models, for example, infrastructure requirements, the basic network function types, UPF, the whole idea of extensibility, vendors extensions, and a meta model, a lot of that stuff has been happening in SIG 2. Which is fine, right? But it's been very ad hoc, and there hasn't been a single owner for all the models. And the point being that a lot of the models relate to each other, right? Especially when we start to talk about service assurance and policies. And there seems to be a need to have a complete picture of all the models that we have and an owner for the models. By owner, I don't mean a dictator, somebody who will say, these are the models and this is what everybody should use. It's the entire community working on them, but having one location, one address, one repository, one document, which is the source of truth for our modeling and where we can see the models together. It seemed natural to us that it would be workgroup 1, which is the architecture workgroup. And so that's what we're proposing here, that it would become, for the entire community, the place of ownership of Nephio models.
Yeah, fully understand. This is also maybe if you and Bernard have done some work in terms of identifying the key areas where we should start to define the models, that will be worthwhile to share with this working group so that we can then focus on those first.
So that's a perfect handover for the next topic. So because we will already see in the next topic that there are certain concepts which we need to establish regarding exposure of capabilities and requirements. And here, I believe sort of the work which Wim is now driving should lead us to this notion of how would we want to capture that in the future, and in such a way that we wouldn't have to write new types of routines over and over again, but have some kind of conventions of how to structure sort of our CRDs.
Yeah. Now, maybe one thing where I disagree a bit with Tal is that, I mean, if I have to say, we have a single repository where all our APIs are documented, which is Nephew API. And I think second to that, we have been discussing the CRDs. Actually, if you look to the CRDs that we are using in R1, they have been discussed both in between SIG 1 and SIG 2. And then we refined them in SIG 2 when we were implementing it. But the baseline of what we are using has been discussed between SIG 1 and SIG 2. And I can point you to the document if you want, because we have had extensive discussions on that between both SIGs before we went implementation.
Yeah, I'm not.
So,
yeah, the process has always been community process, but my point is more about project ownership, right? Yes, there is that repository there, but generally SIG 1 does not touch the repositories, right? They're not committers usually. Point being that, yeah, there should be a space, I think, to discuss modeling, not in relation to SIG 2 work, but in relation to architecture. So a SIG 1 perspective on this.
Yeah. I mean, the requirements is a good start, right? But I see the process being the same, right? So that's why we wanted to present the next item here, because I believe, like you said, is that the requirements and the input on how we should structure them should be discussed here, right? And then implementation will follow eventually. But so I think that flow I agree with, right? So, but it will flow from the moment we have a mature model or a framework that we believe we can do. I think it will move to SIG 2 for implementation, because we have to come to a KRM type of environment that we check in and that we can use, right? So the flow for me is it starts here, but it will flow through SIG 2 somehow, where we have to then start. I have implementation.
Yeah. By the way,
I think
we
did that in release 1. We did that in release 1 as well,
right? I think we're kind of moving towards this. I guess I'm just suggesting we formalize it more. I just want to point out, modeling is not, in my view, not just KRM types for infrastructure, right? It's all our models, including those that aren't just KRM. So ORAN integration with their interfaces. If we talk about Etsy, if we talk about Tosca, if we talk about Yang at some point. So modeling, I think, covers a lot of our data models, which of course we're always declarative, but we do know that there are other technologies out there other than Kubernetes that we sometimes interact with, and we want it to be cohesive as a whole. So yeah.
Yeah, the point understood, Tal. Hey, Wim and team, do you want to spend maybe the next 15 minutes to talk on this topic and the infra requirements?
Yes. Let me see where I put the document. Sorry, I will. No, it's actually here, right? So I can link it. Yeah. So this is an effort, by the way. We presented it yesterday in SIG 2 as well. So this is first
you want
of all
to present?
I'll
stop sharing, Wim.
Yeah, I can present. Right. So this is an effort that we have been discussing with Bernard and Eric, right? Do you see my screen, Anita?
Yes.
Yes.
So which is basically or point A in the release 2 deliverables. I mean, if I'm honest, so what we want to do here is share the information. So we discussed yesterday in SIG 2, so we had half an hour or something like that, I think. with what we are talking about. And then, but one of the things that I believe we should handle, as Tal and Bernard were suggesting, is there is a requirement section here that we have to figure out, and we have to find a structure for it. But let me first introduce what we are talking about. So first of all, the goal, and I didn't correct it yet, so it should be objective, is so a lot of our customers, meaning the people implementing the network functions, that they have a lot of struggles to fulfill, let's say, all the requirements that network functions have when they deploy, right? So in other words, there's a lot of, let's say, things that are discovered implicitly or during the deployment or very late into the process. And as a result, it fails, and it's a lot of iterations and a lot of team involved and stuff like that. So the effort is very big today. And the goal of this activity is to, of course, given that we are about automation, and is to make this, is to automate this, right? So we want to do way better than what we do today and ease that process, right? So that's kind of the goal, right? So if you then look at requirements that we have highlighted, is that, so we wanted to, in order to achieve that, we wanted to basically, we believe that we need a more extensive mechanism from the network function. And that doesn't necessarily mean only the vendor, that can also, so there can be mixed, but there is a much more explicit way of defining the requirements that are needed from a network function or from a, let's say, a service. A service may be a bad word, but let's say you deploy a core, what that means towards the infra, right? So we are talking here about networking, we are talking about host requirements, we are talking about software packages, we are talking about CNI, storage, so everything regarding that is not necessarily a network function, but they are depending on these things to be able to be operationalized, right? So that's what we are talking about. And so if you look to, in R1, we did this very small thing, but we really didn't do a lot of it. So the idea here is to make that way more explicit and build a framework around that we can use for all of these items eventually, right? So on one thing is expressing the requirements, then the second piece is, of course, validating them to see, are they already fulfilled? Is it okay? Is it not okay? We want to have a mechanism to, let's say, monitor. So validate includes monitoring to see what is active, and then potentially influence what happens towards the infra, right? Important to note is that this is not a single network function, so this can be a collection, and so that means that we can also have conflicts, and we have to manage those type of things in that framework, right? Also important is that we don't want to do this in a way that that people have to have root access and get logged in left, right, and center. So you want to basically build a full automation framework that would allow for this. Okay, so that's kind of the goal and objective, right? Towards the point of, so this is a comment from Bernard, and I think the next slide is also from you, Bernard. Do you want to
I can quickly go. Yes, I can quickly go through that. So basically, the idea is that if we've got these technical possibilities to identify the requirements, identify the capabilities, that we could automate that in a sort of a well-structured process. And if you could just sort of exactly sort of this process, this is an example. And again, sort of we have to definitely refine it. But as a high-level user journey, the idea was to say that we've got a management cluster, and when we are sort of providing the physical infrastructure for a new sort of cluster environment for the production, for instance, then there would also be the possibility that the infrastructure provider would upload sort of his so-called infrastructure building blocks. And these building blocks would basically say, in which way could this new cluster be customized, for instance, to support SIOV, huge pages, kernel modules, etc. And in the second step, sort of network function providers, solution providers could come along and say, I've got these network functions. I will also upload these building blocks to the management cluster. And basically, these network functions would not only say, these are the software artifacts which need to be sort of deployed, but they would also specify what kind of requirements they would have towards the infrastructure. And when wanting to bring these building blocks together into a comprehensive solution, sort of the service provider or system integrator would create a CIQ type of deployment descriptor, which would specify where sort of certain network functions should be deployed onto which type of clusters. And this specification would not sort of include the specification of infrastructure configurations, but rather it would describe the intent sort of which the service provider would have. And then based on this information, in step 4, there would be the possibility of automatically validating if that is possible. That means then sort of a validator would take the infrastructure requirements and compare them with the capabilities of the capabilities exposed by the infrastructure, and then see if there's a match. If there's no match, it would sort of send back an error message. If there's a match, ideally there would be some kind of package being generated, which could then be actuated. That means could then facilitate the automated deployment of that network function onto the infrastructure. And of course, we would like to understand if this process of actually deploying this infrastructure, this network function onto the infrastructure is working out well. That means we would want to understand, have the customizations of the infrastructure taken place? Is the network function already sort of up and running? This type of reporting would be nice to have in addition. So that's the high-level user story. Again, details need to be specified based on the experience which we now collect during the implementation. But that would definitely help us, as from a service provider view, to very much more sort of deterministically handle this onboarding procedure, instead of having this sort of, you try to install it, you fail, you fix the issues, and install it again and fail somewhere else. Here we would have a well-defined process which would allow us to do the validation beforehand, and then determine what kind of customizations would be needed.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so basically, I mean, if you then look at it, and I mean, I skipped it in the slide actually, but it starts with having a formal way to define those requirements, right? And I think that's to Tals and Bernard's point on the information modeling. So this is definitely an important step if we do this right. So this will be very important for the next steps to be able to fulfill those type of requirements, to be able to validate and report and actuate upon them. And so if you look at requirements, so we have been discussing a little bit on Slack already with some people. So for example, people could say, I want Multus and I want this. Maybe that's a bad example, but I want this version of this, or I've tested with these versions of software, but my infrastructure has another version. So what do you do, right? So in terms of specifying requirements, it could be fairly extensive with respect to those type of things. So you could basically say, and there could be a hierarchy as well in that. And so for example, I made a point in one of the Slack channels yesterday, is that today we say we need Multus, right? But I think going forward, there will be alternatives to Multus in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So in other words, what you basically want to say is, we want to express, okay, I need additional networks, right, to be connected to. And then the implementation as such, it could be that the vendor specifies, okay, I have tested with Multus with this version, right? But so if you look at this whole area, it could be, it's a very extensive type of framework that we have to develop, and would have to be supported by the vendors, I think, for the most part, but maybe also by other people who might build certain infrastructure. So this is a very big, I think, activity. If we want to do this well, the setting of the requirements is going to be an important step. And I believe this is something we have to spend quite a bit of time on initially to understand that, because a lot of it will be derived from there, from what I see, right? Now, the second thing that you can then do is take those requirements, and I talked here about the scheduler, is use those requirements. And today we have a very simple scheduler. Basically, based on labels selected, we could make it more extensive based on these requirements, similar to how today in Kubernetes a pod gets scheduled to a node, right? So it also looks at various information before it actually assigns a pod to a node, and then it happens. So we have to think in that mode. I believe the scheduler part, I would propose to phase it eventually. So, but this is definitely one of the building blocks and components which we'll need eventually, right? The second thing is then, or the third thing basically is a controller itself that can. This is then more acting upon the workload cluster itself or upon the cluster itself, giving, let's say, host requirements, giving software packages, giving networking requirements and stuff like that, figuring out what the status is and act upon it, right? So that's another component or building block that we need. And then I have the feeling that we need to restructure a little bit on how we have architected our clusters these days. Because today a cluster is kind of a package, but it's already an implementation. And I believe in order to succeed in this journey, and that's my personal view right now, is that we have to introduce some concepts to represent the cluster properly inside of Nevio, and that we then have multiple implementations that sit underneath, like Cluster API or like KCC or OpenShift or GKE and stuff like that. And that we have an ability to, let's say, aggregate somehow information through that system. But okay, that's more personal flavor than anything else. Also introduce the concept of node pools, because it might be, if you look at hardware specific, let's say, dependencies, it might be that you already have certain hardware in place, or that and that you can potentially schedule it on another node pool and things like that. So there is a whole set of information here that we might have to explore and see how best we model and architect that. And then also potentially we need some agents at the cluster level to help us actuate things, because if you talk about kernel modules and stuff like that, and other hardware or host OS related activities, we have to have a capability to be able to, on one end, report, but also potentially actuate and stuff like that. So our goal was, so in terms of phasing, so this has been, let's say, proposed between Bernard, Eric, and myself, but hasn't been, let's say, accepted, is that we should probably start with taking a few use cases. So we suggested Multis and a kernel module, because we have those already in R1, and start, let's say, discussing and building the framework and potential building blocks going forward, and then extend it with other use cases and other scenarios to see whether the model holds, and take it from there. But that's kind of what we have been discussing, and so we wanted to share this and provide feedback. But I think for me, the thing in SIG1, I think where I would like to, let's say, collaborate quite heavily is on the definition on the requirement setting. That is basically the starting point of the whole journey. So with that, I don't know whether there's a question. Yeah, Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question is actually more requirements on this case. It sounds to me like there are a fair amount of things that are a little more static than dynamic. So so there would be some human that would be qualifying a vendor X on platform Y at some point. So in terms of installing which set of versions of software, we're not, some other Prometheus or something, or kernel modules and things are needed. That is not a dynamic situation. That is not something where during the process of deployment, we'll go figure out what needs to be installed, right? So I mean, in theory, so what I want to say is this thing seems to be something we can capture on a package. Whereas the one thing that I could see is dynamic is, if as a user input would be, I have different capacity needs, and therefore I need more VFs for SRV, or I need like a smart NIC to be used, and things like that. So those, I would say, yeah, the Nevio system at runtime make a scheduling decisions. But then in terms of installation and things, I would imagine, it's more of a use case perspective, because it's the building block seems to point to and I could be interpreted wrong for what Wim wrote. It seems to point to everything. You want everything to be very dynamic. So there will be
Well,
a.
I mean, I think.
So you have a package that says I need all these different. I can support all these different versions of Multis, or IPv6 or so on, CNI versions, and then at runtime we make a selections between this. Whereas I would imagine, so this is more of a user questions really. In reality, SI or someone actually make the qualifications already, and that could actually be captured on package. Because it's not so much that we would dynamically create infrastructure on different versions and then see whether or not they would have CNI 3.31 versus 3.4, and then they conflict and then the network functions no longer work. That doesn't seem to be like. I mean, for now, I don't see the necessary use case, but maybe I'm wrong. I just.
So if I may say,
yeah, that's actually more.
Yeah,
Bernard,
yeah.
sorry. Yeah,
Bernard, you go first. Yeah, you go first.
Yeah. So I would like to structure it a little bit top down in the sense of capabilities which should be exposed. So there are generic aspects such as having multiple network interfaces, etc., which are version independent, hopefully. Yeah. So where we would say this is a rather stable type of requirement, where we just would say we need this and please sort of make that available before we do the actual onboarding. And unfortunately, we are in daily life also stepping into this issue of version conflicts, where certain capabilities, how should I say, are implicitly expected, and they didn't do the checking of that previous versions were not actually supporting that, and then we're in this trouble of actually sorting that out. But this I would down prioritize. Yes, that means I would like to have first of all come up with a generic approach and then see how we can later on try to capture that versioning issue. And ideally, we should not try to specify when specifying the requirements, the implementation aspects, but rather what do we want to have as a feature set or as a service provided by the infrastructure so that the onboarding will be successful.
Correct. So yeah, I mean, going back to, so I would like to, for seeking from SIG1 would be more specific use cases where we can design a system or not, and the more important thing is not over design the systems to do anything at runtime, because it sounds like a lot of things could be captured in a package. That information either is exposed. I mean, it's kind of interesting to have it captured and dynamically scheduled on pieces, but over time. But then that's I'll probably comment on that on the doc, or maybe on slide on this.
Yeah,
anyway,
but Steven, I'm with you, right? So I mean, when I initially started, do you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I'm with you, right? Because I was very skeptical in the beginning, but I mean, if you think about it, right? Whether or not you build it completely, my point is this, or where I start changing my mind was the following. If we allow it to be built that we can change it dynamically, that doesn't mean a lot of people will use it like that, but you have the full flexibility, right? So as such, I mean, for me, if you report about something and say, okay, I cannot schedule it because of this, you almost are halfway there to the actuation. You see? So if you look at the whole picture and stuff like that, but I do agree with you, let's walk before run, right? But you could build a system in a way that you can, if people want to consume it in a fully dynamic way, that they could. I'm not sure whether people would, but that's a different conversation.
It doesn't seem to be an actual use case for some part of it. I'm not saying not all part of it. Obviously, there's dynamic user inputs while they do network plannings, where it isn't captured on the package statically, and then they need controllers to actually do the scheduling. But then not everything is actually more.
But for example, to give a concrete example, let's say today we are dependent on GTP kernel module, right?
Yeah.
We basically install it. Yes. You could come up with a framework to say, hey, Free5GC wants the GTP kernel module. And before it even, first of all, we check whether it's there, right? Mm-hmm. And then you could go into a mode to say, okay, we automatically deploy, right? You see, so it can be as as simple as that. But okay, that's now a very concrete example of something that we have in R1. And the same is true for Multus at the moment, right? We just basically pre-install everything. We could actually say, okay, we don't install Multus, and only when there is someone needing it, we install it, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that we have to do that.
No,
from
so
the
this is
beginning,
the validation. This is the validation part or qualification part before you deploy it. That in the in
Yes.
Bernard's requirement sets. It's a little less on that being the things that we're pointing to. Hey, this it's not. So we're not at this point anyway. I know John and I, when we first built the PLCs, we had that ambition, which is not you take the requirements and you actually create a cluster off of that requirement. So that's a different workflow. So if we do
Yes.
this, then things needs to be a lot more dynamic. But for now, anyway, for what I could see, there's certain things that probably could be done more statically. But anyway, so that's
Yeah, I
but
agree.
keep in mind,
I
if I may just chime in. Currently,
Yes.
we are wanting to also reuse our infrastructures. We're sometimes blocked because we've sort of deployed one infrastructure, one network setup, one configuration, and we are stuck to it and cannot dynamically reassign the resources for another purpose. So in this sense, sort of having the possibility of sort of adapting the deployments based on the requirements would be very, very helpful for us, because we're not having to then repurchase physical hardware, set it up over and over again, and block sort of experts who are sort of scarce for doing that. So
Yeah.
I would really want to emphasize a little bit, try to sort of make that sort of a little bit more dynamic than what we have currently.
Maybe yes, maybe I would add a use case, for example, in commercial networks. Sometimes, unfortunately, we need to react fast onto when we have a problem in a site. We need maybe to redeploy a new function in another site. And in such case, we don't have exactly the same, for example, the same environment and so on. So we need, if we want to redeploy fast a network function, to be sure that the full stack is ready. And as a result, if we are able, let's say, to take the network function with all the requirements, we can, let's say, deploy the underlying infrastructure and then the CNF to recover fast. I think this is a use case also that we should have in mind, because this is typically what we are facing in commercial networks today. And today, to be honest, when you need to for some function, when we have some big problems, it can take a lot of time, because we need to reconfigure, and we have some manual process and so on. And sometimes we miss some information, I said previously, because it was implicitly defined head of some infrastructure guy. So if we are able to formalize the requirements from CNF, I think it's very important for us. But as you said, Wim and Dana, we must go step by step and try to demonstrate how we can move forward. But we won't solve all the requirements in one step. I fully agree with that. But if we can demonstrate the concept and moving forward, it could be great.
Yeah, because Eric, maybe Bernard, this is one of the discussion, maybe quick, right? So for example, take Multus, you have 10 versions, right?
Yeah.
I'm still of the opinion that you as a service provider will select a version that you believe is appropriate for a given point in time, right? Or you do it together with the infra, the person who delivers your cloud, right? So you do it in conjunction. And so as a result, you will not have 5 versions to pick from and stuff like that. So there will be some, let's say, things that you can, let's say, fragment or basically point to a specific thing, even if the customer of one NF says I need version 10, the other says 11, and you have basically selected. Okay.
Right? We are working exactly in this area in Silver project, for example. So we try to define some kind of, let's say, of what they call units. It's, for example, Multus or another CNI, and we will try to define, let's say, one specific version when we want to deploy, let's say, a Silver cluster version 1 or 2 and so on. So it's exactly in this direction we are going also.
So that's what I'm asking. So Eric and Bernard actually pointed out a use case. The use case is when you want to migrate or replicate a deployment on an existing infrastructure that may actually be running something under different versions. And then therefore you wanted to do a check at that point to see whether or not you'll be able to run this network function on these configurations, but then on an infrastructure that may run slightly different versions of software.
Yeah, sure.
That makes sense. That would be the use case where you want to do that at runtime dynamically. That may otherwise not be captured statically. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is Bala. I just want to add to what Stephen is saying a little bit. In that we are privy to a couple of service providers' method of deploying network functions and what kind of a mandate and what kind of a guidelines they provide to both the vendors and the platform providers. Just to add to Stephen's point, the one of the largest provider in the US, infrastructure is completely done by a separate team, and the deployment of network functions, the group that is responsible for that, they are not even supposed to do anything, including the creation of namespaces. Even the namespaces are created by a separate team, and the deployment of the orchestrator should only deploy into those namespaces. I just wanted to add to what Stephen was saying. Some of them could be extremely mandated, extremely protocol-based in certain service providers. That's probably the lay of the land. But I'm not suggesting against where we are going. But I just wanted to share my understanding of the lay of the land based on a couple of big service providers in the US.
Yeah, but by the way, Bala, just maybe a given point, right? I do agree that a lot of people are like that, right? But that doesn't mean, right, today that you have a manual way to communicate between one team and another. Think just about us having an automated workflow that can express what the NF needs from the infra. The fulfillment of it, okay, will be done by a different team, but that doesn't, how it and who acts upon it is important. But that's why we have this, the way I look at it, this requirement document, if you will, is kind of the API between the NF and the infra team, right? And rather than today, there's a manual process, or in a lot of cases, it's a human discussion and then things are forgotten and stuff like that. We want to formalize it. Just think about it like that way. And then whether the infra team uses a completely automated system or they do it manually, that's then that's an implementation and specific, if you will, right? So that's how I look at it. So I don't think it changes the framework as such. It just defines a clear way, or API, if you will, between the NF and the infra, and would be extensive into multiple dimensions. And also then, for example, if the NF people say it doesn't work, maybe they haven't specified everything they needed, right? So I think of it like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's why I said I'm not against where we are going. I just wanted to share my knowledge on what we have seen. Yeah. Cool. I think we are well over.
Yes, sorry.
I think probably we should park this. What do you guys think? Then take it on Monday.
Yeah, I think what I think here this action would do is we need to come up with some requirements from a modeling point of view. I think that's definitely a big activity here, and it would be good to have some examples. I mean, I can help lead it with Bernard and Eric, but I think we have to discuss it in SIG1. Cool. At least I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, agree. And Wim, if you could help us guide us a little bit, and Eric, if you could put in the experience from Silva, that would be great, so that we come up with a common conclusion.
Yeah. If you want, we can invite some Silva guys also to the discussion in a meeting if you want.
Yeah, it would be good to have them discuss what they are doing and maybe discuss it with the rest of the team. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day and have a great day, night, evening, wherever you are.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.